Hey everybody, welcome back to Fugue Office Hours. This is number 4, and I'm Drew, and Fugue is all about putting engineers in command of cloud security and compliance. Today we're excited. We have my co-founder, Josh Stella here to get into a really cool subject. And of course, we've got Ricardo Green here as well. And Ricardo, this subject, this office hours was your idea. Why don't you kind of kick off what you were hoping to get into?
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Number 4. So this is awesome. So really, what I was envisioning, Josh and I do some speaking engagements together. Josh has had a lot of experience working national security. He's a developer. He's an architect. And when I got the notification, when he announced, "Hey, I'm going on vacation for a week," the wheels started turning. So it was like, I'd love to have Josh on an office hours segment, pick his brain and actually apply it to, a lot of the stuff we're doing at Fugue. So like our initial office hours, we got people set up. So we're working along that mountain, base camp 1 stuff. But Josh and his vision of, where companies really need to go when it comes to security is vital. And we have a unique concept of using a baseline, which is different than any of our competitors. So really understanding the vision behind it, and then ultimately, how the heck do I use it? So I'm going to do some of the how do I use it. But, Josh, I really wanted to pick your brain. First of all, you're a security architect. You're going on vacation. What do you think about, man? What scares you?
Oh man, what I think about is, Fugue, we run a SaaS, and that means we have a bunch of resources in the cloud that hackers are constantly trying to exploit. And that's not unique to us, right? Like if you have resources in the cloud, hackers are trying to exploit them. And it's critical to what we do, both as a business and as conscientious human beings, that we protect those things in a way that prevents those hackers from getting at our data or getting at our customer data. I mean, we're extremely conscientious about what data we have and how we store it. And we are, I think, extraordinarily paranoid in a good way. But when I go on vacation, what I'm really hoping, when I go on vacation, I go way out in the backwoods. And, I was just telling you guys, I put a big extension antenna on my truck now. So when I do that, I can check the network. And I do that because, what you worry about is an event happening and you not being fully aware of it, or an event happening and your infrastructure and your cloud configuration not automatically responding. And that's what it should be doing. So when I go on vacation, I'm pretty confident because of all the measures we've taken, and we're running Fugue against Fugue. So this is to me the ultimate security solution for cloud, which is why we built it. But yeah, I mean, you go on vacation, it's always in the back of your mind, like something could come up,
So when you think about alerts, like how are you set up to receive alerts? Like what kind of alerts are you talking about? And I'm specifically thinking like in terms of like when we start talking like Fugue baselines, why is that better? What's the differentiator about it? Why is it better? And and I'll show it because I built an environment just for office hours that we're going to work through. So I'm going to pull it up. I'm going to pull up the visualizer, and if you could just talk about it just from that concept, like what do you get alerted? I mean, you got to get tired of getting alerts. Every time somebody does something, you get an alert.
Yeah, so boy, a few things there. One is I view alerts and notifications, information about my cloud environment from 2 perspectives. One is, are we doing things right? And by that I mean, are we avoiding making mistakes that we know to avoid? That's hard. A lot of people are still there in cloud, right? Like just Do I have the right kinds of encryption enabled? Like, for example, in S3, using standard server-side encryption in S3 does almost nothing for you. But having rotating KMS keys on your S3 buckets and requiring access to KMS as well, like, is my configuration kind of fundamentally safe? I don't think about that as much from an alert perspective, because here at Fugue, we have a process where we're going to catch, using Fugue, we're going to catch those errors before they make it to production. So in a lot of worlds that I've worked in when I was at AWS and here at Fugue with our customers, there are lots of teams doing things, and you want to know if somebody is making an error you can identify in advance as an error. And that's where, like, policy, and we use Open Policy Agent, and we have all these rules, CIS and Fugue best practices. I see you've got FBP on this. Yep. And by the way, thanks for inviting me. This is fun to do office hours with you guys. I love hanging out with both of you, and thanks for having this idea, Ricardo. So that's one kind of thing. If people are doing things that you can identify in advance as wrong. Now, we do this for a living, and I think we're really good at that part. I know we're really good at that part. A lot of folks, you should be concerned a lot with that. But what I'm really looking for are changes in the environment that maybe there isn't a rule for, but that strike me as something potentially dangerous. I'll give you one example of this, and this is where baselines come in, and I'll go into baselines more in a minute. If that new instance, or that Ricardo instance you have on the screen of EC2 were to change their IAM role associations, I don't even care what it's from and what it's to. Like, so here you've got, on one of those instances, I don't know if those guys have IAM role associations, but if a role association were to change, even if we didn't have a rule saying, hey, a role association change is scary, I would immediately go look at that. Because that is the kind of thing that could be an escalation in terms of permissions. And unless I understand both of those IAM roles, I don't know the answer to that. So does that answer the question you asked?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was looking in, so I carved out one of the networks that I was kind of hacking around in to try to set up an example of, how we start fixing and basically just carving out a piece of an environment to start working on that one. But, when you talk about that specifically, so I can pull up this sort of role that you're talking about. This is exactly what you're talking about. So this is in, where the visualizer, I can type IAM into the visualizer, and it's going to come up with all of these different IAM roles. And then I'll have this association with this specific instance and that profile. So that's, what you're talking about, being able to assume those sorts of things. So I think that's great. My question, how does Fugue, how do we combat that? Like, so we always talk about, like, I talk to customers all the time about baselines and how important it is to set a baseline. Can you talk about why that is an approach that's better than kind of just, because we always think about perimeter security. You and I, we have these discussions with customers all the time. Oh, we've got the perimeter covered. But that role association and being able to jump roles, man, that's brutal.
There's no perimeter because there's an API control backplane.
Yes.
Right. So I'm trying to think what order to cover this in. Let's talk about baselines for a second, what Fugue means by baselines and what we've been working on from the very beginning at Fugue. When Fugue examines your environment, we are not just looking at policies. We're not just trying to look at a few things, a list of rules, and tell you where those rules have failed and succeeded. That's a naive and inadequate approach to solving cloud security. And by the way, cloud can be far more secure than any data center that has ever been built. And I have a very high degree of confidence saying that because it's provable. The same APIs that create that control plane that essentially deprive us of a network perimeter also allow us, if we use the right approach, to apply software engineering and computer science to proving correctness and security. But what you have to do is what Fugue does. So when we establish a baseline, we are capturing every bit of API information about the configuration of that system. So sometimes people think of baselines as like, Terraform or CloudFormation templates.
Yeah.
Terraform and CloudFormation are shorthand. They do not tell you what's going to happen in reality. So for example, when you make a VPC network, you've got a few lines of Terraform or CloudFormation, you make the VPC network. Well, AWS gives you all kinds of side effects, which are, useful. Things like default security groups. Well, that's not expressed in that Terraform template. That's not expressed in that CloudFormation template, but it happens when you run it. So what Fugue does is we extract all of those details, and then we can perform computation against them. We have an in-memory model. That's what we mean by a baseline. No one else does that.
So in other words, kind of maintaining the state of everything.
Yeah, it's a state machine. You have to have that state machine. Yeah.
Yes, this is what for everybody watching, this is one of the things, and this is within our visualizer, this section of attributes. So for those of you that use infrastructure as code, so you can a lot of times get away with, if you don't specify a security group, Terraform will automatically default to the default security group, those sorts of things. So what Josh is talking about is everything that's here, all these attributes we're collecting as part of that state. So setting the baseline. So one of the things, when Drew talked about office hours is kind of teaching. So these are opportunities for people to understand our philosophies, but also to teach. So customers that are new to Fugue, and we talk a lot about kind of Basecamp 1, I think, and you and I probably agree on this, is that setting a baseline is probably something you want to do early and often to track those sort of changes. And we always talk about, customers will talk about a workflow, like how difficult it is when I set a baseline. So part of that is what I want to talk about. So basically capturing all that information, we can see right here, if I click baseline, I don't have a baseline set up. And setting a baseline is as simple as this. So really clicking a button. But then we have our, other folks that say, I don't want to mess around with the UI. I don't want pictures. So I decided that today would be a good opportunity for us to play around in our CLI. So I'm going to set this using CLI. So you guys will see these commands, but while I'm doing that, I want to ask Josh another question, is that, other customers have said to us, they're using other sorts of tools to capture drift. And one of the things that customers always say is, well, we get so many false positives. How is a baseline not giving you false positives?
Okay. There are really, so when you say positive, a false positive in this scenario means something that is not meaningful, right? There's a difference between data and information. Data is just, raw knowledge. Information are things that matter. Information are data that are human actionable, human, logical, or in some cases, machine actionable, although machines are pretty good at data. So when you baseline and then you ask Fugue to tell you when things change, you have an ability using our product to say, okay, this is in a known good state. we've all agreed. Now, only Fugue in this whole category of, dealing with these cloud security and management issues, only Fugue actually knows the state in a single place, right? Others do things like watch logs. Well, logs are going to tell you deltas, but they're not going to tell you the actual full state information. So when you set that baseline, what you're saying to Fugue is, I know this is good. Now tell me if anything changes. Not if anything changes like a log entry going by, but if anything is a mutation away from what our state machine understands as the known good state. And now, might you get some results that aren't particularly dangerous? You might. However, by establishing that baseline, we're not going to report on things that you have said are correct. Okay, so a lot of the noise is eliminated. The other thing about that is, as you think about mutation over time, as you think about, I've heard from folks, everything we do goes through a CI/CD pipeline. And I'll tell them, well, turn on a baseline. Turn on a baseline, turn on drift detection from the baseline. And 100% of the time, what they find is people are actually going in and changing things outside of the, I won't even say approved, outside of the normal flow. And there are good reasons they do that. So one thing about cloud, unlike the data center, right? In the data center, when you shove a switch into a rack or a firewall into a rack or a collection of servers or whatever, to change that requires somebody like going out and doing something. Either, it has a human intervention, and we got good at trapping for those kinds of events in change control boards and things like that. In cloud, everything is accessible via API.
Basically what I just did.
Oh yeah, you did. Exactly.
So basically a couple of lines, I set our baseline. So literally, it's that easy with the CLI, but it's kind of funny thinking about it, is just as I set a baseline to protect us and to be able to capture those changes with the Fugue, you can do that same thing using the AWS CLI to make a change outside of the processes that you described.
Yep.
Which is, it's a scary thought. It's nice for efficiency because I love being able to, and this is probably something that you would do right before you go on vacation. Hey, let me make sure nobody else screws with my environments, and I know what's going on because I'm now going to have a record of all of these changes. But literally in, 12 seconds of starting to talk about the baseline, I've set a baseline. So if we go back and we look at it, if I refresh this back into this specific environment, we now have a baseline established and enabled.
Yep. So
literally click of a button, we've captured configurations of everything. So 2 pages, and this is just comprised of a lot of the network stuff. So basically at this point, if anything changes, we're going to get an alert, right?
Yeah, if you configure notification in that way, you will. And I generally do that on many resource types. Certain resource types that I know are like it's normal to mutate in my particular environment, I might not. I might carve out some things. And by the way, we do, when you're using Fugue and we have the like recommended resource types, that's going to help you sort of carve out the stuff you might not want to baseline, because some mutation is a normal kind of doing business on cloud, but many kinds of mutation, like I don't know, network routing tables, security group rules, anything to do with IAM. IAM is the least understood and most dangerous cloud technology on AWS, and similarly identity in other providers, because it forms a whole network. It's not just about identity anymore. The identity network is essentially the routing table. is essentially the firewall rules plus routing table of how a lot of these services connect. So for those things, you know, I want those notifications. So I'm going to make some choices on that. And then as I mature up that mountain, right? Because the goal in my view is 100% automation. And that may sound crazy, but it's not. You know, people may think, well, there's no way we can get to full automation. Well, are you using a laptop? If you're using a laptop, are you managing its memory? Are you any longer going into configuration files to associate devices with, you know, IRQs? No, the operating system manages it. Well, the cloud is just a big global distributed computer. And that's really all it is. All these ideas of cloud being distributed data centers, they're really kind of anachronistic skeuomorphs that are designed, you know, metaphors even, that are designed to make it approachable to you. But you have to be able to automate this stuff so that you're no longer putting error-prone humans in the loop. And that's a lot of what Fugue is about. And that's that journey up that mountain, right? Most folks are at kind of base camp 1 or trying to get to, you know, understand your security posture. You know, then you start tracking changes and you can start to say, well, these kinds of changes matter to me. And that's also, by the way, the key to getting rid of, reducing noise to signal in notifications is understanding what matters in your environment.
So from a process standpoint, and just I stopped sharing for a bit because I wanted to jump into my AWS account and kind of test Fugue out. But anyway, what you could see is after I did the update of the environment, I then just triggered a scan. So again, all of that not interacting with the UI at all. So I'm thinking about like operational workflow. So we've touched a lot on Basecamp 1, and we're definitely going to do some more, and then looking at compliance reporting and that sort of thing. But so like when you envision, like, I mean, you touched on something that I think is key for people to understand is like nirvana, like when you get to that point of really, and you're never completely comfortable, but when you're starting to automate these things, but I think there's baby steps in automation. So like when you're thinking of operationally, what would you say is that process or that workflow that you see that companies should adopt kind of in those early stages to get, you know, to a level of automation outside of somebody that's getting comfortable with the CLI? Because, you know, I'll do this all day, but yeah. What are your thoughts on that workflow?
Yeah, so you know, it depends on kind of which end of the SDLC you're tackling it from and what your job is. Historically I'm a developer, so I build stuff. I'm not a in my career, I've dealt obviously a whole lot with security, being focused in national security, being a software architect and a programmer. But I have not been like the security analyst side. I've worked with them. So let me talk about the developer side first. When I am writing code, you know, there are perhaps legendary programmers out there, you know, Bill Joy has some legends around him that can just write correct code or debug in their head. Most of us are not like that, right? We're looking to get our tools to give us information about where we're wrong, right? So I'll use a goofy example. If I decide to multiply a string by a floating point value in a typed language, if it's got a good compiler or, you know, REPL or interpreter, it's going to tell me, or debugger, it's going to tell me like, hey, that's probably wrong.
Yeah.
You're going to get an unexpected result. So as a developer, what I really want is, and now that infrastructure is subordinate to code, right? You were just using the CLI, which is what I like to do as well. When you can modify your environments in the cloud, you know, build global networks in 5 minutes through code, something in your tool chain should be telling you if you're doing dangerous stuff, right? If multiplying a floating point value by a string is dumb, the mistakes you can make in security on cloud are insanely higher risk than a bug in your application code. So what I want as a baby step is to turn on Fugue on all my dev environments and have it get triggered so that whenever I make a change to those environments, Fugue is going to come back and tell me if I've made errors that are going to impact the security and fidelity of the environment. So that's one answer to that.
Almost, I guess, yeah, and I guess I'll put it into context here. So essentially, if I list my environments, so we see. So let me bring it up to the screen. So it's as simple as what you're saying is in dev. So every time you push, every time you have a new deployment, if you have the CLI and you run Fugue scan, whatever. So with the CLI installed, somebody could have this as essentially the next stage, just Fugue scan and whatever the environment ID is.
Yep.
Simple, one line, and you're running a scan and you're getting feedback.
Yeah, and that brings up another point about Fugue's design, which is, unlike anything else, we're not just a kind of running in the background, the security team's going to look at it. It's an interactive tool for developers building stuff on cloud, right? And that's how you can ultimately solve this problem. In the same way your compiler tells you not to do the goofy thing with the bad, whack of typecasting or whatever, Fugue is going to tell you, don't have that port open. That's going to be dangerous in production. Or the combination of these different configuration items is going to be dangerous, and hackers exploit that, and we know that. So, but it has to be interactive. So you have to be able to say, right now, tell me, and get those results quickly.
So if you look on screen, so while I kind of went off screen for a little bit and hacked around, I was just, can you explain or talk through this? You didn't see me do it, but I want you to, this is our test, Mr. CTO. What changed? What happened here?
Yeah, so what we're seeing here is on the left-hand side are, in this case, the baseline attributes. It says previous attributes because you can have generational mutation, right? So you're starting with a baseline. In this case, I'm assuming anyway that this is the environment you just baselined. And so those previous attributes are actually from the baseline. You can see how much detail we're capturing on a security group. If you're not familiar with security groups, they're essentially kind of like firewall rules, although they have some other characteristics. Originally, we had two open ports, which look like 80 and 443 on IPv4 and IPv6. And it looks like over on the right-hand side, which is the mutated state, right? The change event, the drift event. We now have 3 ports. You opened up SSH to world on port 22. In addition to 80 and 443, I think are in there too. And I think this really illustrates why the baseline is so critical. Another security tool might just tell you, hey, something happened in the logs. Fugue's going to tell you, here's the known good state.
Yeah.
Everything about it.
If I go back and I want to fix that, I can just go back to that previous attribute. So say I'm doing it manually, I can go back and fix that. So that level of information. And that's, we kind of, this is really what office hours are all about, because I think it gives us an opportunity to interact with our customers, but to really understand how we use our own tool, how we're getting that information. And just from a process perspective, I like to highlight to customers all the time is that, customers talk about level of effort with Fugue. Like this, I set a baseline at the desktop. I triggered a scan at the desktop. If I wanted to get the results and get this event, I could do that at the desktop as well, and automate that sort of thing. But, when we talk about the depth of the information that we get from all of the attributes of the resources, I think it's also a good thing to point out. I did this on a security group because that's where we see most of the activity. But I think, Josh, you point out, and I don't have it in this specific environment, IAM, how monitoring drift on your IAM resources is so crucial. And if you all haven't seen it, Josh has done a master class where he basically dissected a well-known hack. And that was using IAM and traversing different roles, taking over instance profiles, modifying, and just kind of fishing around. Once you get in there, you're able to surf IAM, which is scary. But that's, this is really what we wanted to stress. As we do these, it's really learning for customers, also figuring out where they can grasp a vision of how to start using Fugue in their day-to-day. So from creating the environment, setting a baseline, going on vacation, but setting up alerts so that when these things change. So if you see that when you're out in the woods and you get that alert that pops up in your email or however you get the alerts, and you say, hey, Ricardo, go back and close this security group. I realize, you're not intending to do anything bad, but you're getting that drift alert. So you're getting a notification, which tells you somebody changed something.
Actually, the notification I'm going to get is that Fugue fixed it, because with security group changes, I'm going to turn on baseline enforcement.
Nice. So So for everyone, once we get there, you can start enforcing the baseline. And that's a great point. So I've carved out, so this is really just my Canada network that I'm cleaning up. And we'll go through that process, but we definitely, Drew, we're going to have to do another office hours on baseline enforcement as we move up the mountain. But Josh makes a good point, because, when we did the early office hours, we talked about the flexibility of creating the environment. So, what Josh is basically saying is I can go in here if I wanted to edit the environment or even create another one that's just going to be based on the security group. So I can look at, VPC, ec2.security group, and just have the environment set up that way, which is really cool. And I can do, enable the enforcement on that. And it's like you said, Fugue is going to fix it. So you can go away and feel good that I'm not going to screw stuff up.
Yeah, and well, exactly. And honestly, as you get to, so we're talking about like the vacation scenario, but the bigger, scarier real world scenario is, people go on vacation. It's the scarier thing is the accumulation of cloud configurations over time, right? As people are migrating to cloud, and there's this really naive idea out there that if we can prevent ourselves from making mistakes on, day one being when the infrastructure configuration is provisioned. So you run a Terraform apply, you run a CloudFormation stack, that if we just keep checking what we're doing up front, as the pile grows bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger of cloud infrastructure, we'll be okay. That is completely wrong. The 95% of the problem is on day 2 to infinity. You can get it right up front, and of course Fugue will help you do that with checking in dev environments and policies and regulas, even pre-deployment. But everyone's so focused there. But in reality, the scary thing is every day your teams are adding to the pile of stuff in the cloud, and every one of those things forever is subject to mutation that you're not catching. And that's why the baseline is so critical, and that's why the state machine is so critical. You just simply can't. Prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? But in the cloud, because the API control plane, you have to also apply the pound of cure, and you have to do it over and over and over again. Yeah, so that's why we've done it this way at Fugue.
Yeah, that feels like an important point, with the state machine, which has kind of captured all of the information, the data about everything that you're running and how it's configured, that you can then operate against. You can apply policy as code to that. You can identify any changes that have happened, whether if you should have been looking for those things to be changing or not. Whereas, if you're kind of just sort of scanning, your cloud environment, hitting those APIs, intentionally looking for specific things that you have told that tool you don't want to happen. It might find those things that you've decided are bad, but there could be an infinite number of bad things that are happening to your cloud that you didn't think of ahead of time to look for.
Precisely. So, you know, hackers are very clever, right? If you're familiar with kind of the history of the term hacking, it started out meaning a very clever piece of programming code, right? So the history of the term means clever things, and it's not misplaced, because when you dissect these cloud breaches that have occurred, the hackers are looking for things that you're not looking for, and they know what you're looking for. They read the same stuff you do. They're familiar with CIS benchmark. They're familiar with NIST. They're familiar with all that stuff. So they're looking for alternatives to what security-minded folks have predicted. And guess what? Humans are terrible at things like remembering stuff and never making mistakes, but man, we're good at creatively exploiting opportunity. You know, that's what we're good at. So that's what you're up against, and you cannot predict them. I guarantee you, you cannot predict them. In fact, the most fun part of my job is when I get to play hacker and try to break into our own infrastructure when I read something. I don't break into production. I stand something up and I break into that. I'm like, oh, that was cool. That was so clever. And you can't write enough rules. You want rules. You want, and Fugue best practices, by the way, we put rules in there for all the clever stuff we find hackers doing in the real world that don't, you know, NIST and CIS, that aren't keeping up. So we try to, we always are trying to find those rules. But at the end of the day, you know, when a hacker goes in and does something I haven't predicted, which is exactly what they're going to do, they're going to figure out something I didn't think about, or we didn't think about, and you didn't think about. I want that change to get reverted without my having to worry about it. And so Fugue built that automation machine out of the gate, and it's zero code. If you're having to write scripts to do this, you're going down a Sisyphean path that is doomed to failure. You have to have a state machine. We have an answer for this, right? Computer science has an answer for this. It's a state machine. So I know that was a bit wandering, but yeah, that you can't predict what they're going to do.
So, so it'd be, you know, if I'm kind of thinking kind of day-to-day operations, you know, we talk about, you can have multiple baselines or multiple Fugue environments. And I just wanted to clarify, like you might have your AWS environment, and you can have N number of Fugue environments associated with that AWS environment, depending on which use cases. So you might have one environment is your entire AWS environment. And that might just be like every day, you know, validate everything against whatever compliance regimes we have and produce the reports for me that I need to, you know, send out to auditors or what have you. But then you might say, you know, there's a handful of like resources in my environment that I have deemed to be security critical. It might be that S3 bucket, some security groups, VPC or IAM, what have you. And then you can group those into a Fugue environment and say, if anything changes here, notify me of that change. So I can very quickly evaluate like what changed and figure out if that was good or not. Or alternatively, I can turn on, you know, if those configurations should never change, at least not without going through some sort of approval process or change control process, they're just not allowed to change. So if they do change, I want Fugue to change it back to the baseline that I had established and essentially blessed, right?
Yeah, I tend to overlay 3 Fugue configurations on everything. So when you think about, I've got a collection of stuff in the cloud, I'm going to tell Fugue, go look at absolutely everything and check it against the rules, you know, that we've built in, all the compliance standards and the Fugue best practices, and do that like once or twice a day.
Right.
Just give me that summary data. The other reason I'm going to do it is so that Fugue's collecting that data in our data warehouse. that I can then go access and analyze historically. So when you think about, you come up to an audit, or even just you want to, like for your own sake, understand what was going on. I want a historical record without having to like do goofy stuff like look through logs of what the state of that environment was over time. So I have Fugue go once or twice a day. I think actually I've said it 4 times a day to collect everything and compare it to rules. And then over the same stuff, I do 2 more what are called Fugue environments, which are kind of layers of Fugue functionality and analysis. Over most of the stuff, I will also run a baseline with pure drift detection. I might leave out a few resource types that I know we're going to mutate, right? That I don't want to get notified of a drift on certain things to do with like elastic, load balancers and things like that. I'll include parts of load balancers in that, but not other parts. Like which instances are associated with a load balancer, I probably don't care from a drift detection perspective, because that's naturally going to mutate. And so I'm going to opt out of those. And I'll run that more frequently, maybe twice as frequently, maybe even a little faster. And then I'll have like a really narrow set. And these are it's the same cloud resources, but I'll typically look at security groups, IAM. I'm going to beat the IAM drum again. In network configurations, particularly, and maybe also things like certain things to do with KMS, where I'm going to do enforcement and I'm going to run it fast. So, and by the way, with Fugue, you can just turn off enforcement when you're doing like a CI/CD pipeline push. So if there's a legitimate change that's coming through, CloudFormation or Terraform, or even at the console, you can, say, well, hey, we're having a maintenance window, we got a bug. Tell Fugue to stop for a minute. I'm going to go fix it, re-baseline, and start enforcing again. So you can still make changes, but they have to be officially approved changes for those really critical things that I know are, it's not a perimeter. There's no a DMZ and DMARC, right? We're talking about the configuration of assets all the way through the stack, but those that I'm the most worried about, I'll turn on that enforcement and I'll run it faster.
So Drew, I've got just listening to this, there's probably about 3 or 4 other office hours sessions that we're going to have to do as a result.
Right.
Josh explained is like he's really close to getting to the summit. As we look at those base camps, as we ascend up, and what's cool is being able to see it. So it's not just a graphic on a slide that we show and talk about. It's the reality of it, and it's and Josh may be doing it. I know internally we're doing it on some levels. But it's the reality. This is how you're going to do it, and this is where everyone wants to get to. And obviously, there's challenges of doing it at scale. But I think the way that Josh described it, you can take chunks of it and you can do different things, and that's the cool thing. So we've got a lot of teaching to do for a lot of folks. But I think that kind of lays out a foundation as we go up the extend to those base camps, other topics to talk about. So this is
every one of these we think of like 3 or 4 more that we have to do. And just for anybody that's wondering about, we're talking about base camps. We have this concept that we feel like, any cloud customer that cares at all about security and compliance of what they're doing, and hopefully that's everybody. Everybody kind of climbs this same mountain of cloud security. Base Camp 1 is really just kind of getting your head around your current compliance and security posture, and sort of getting your reporting together, just making sure that you're covering your bases and that you've got things where you need it to be. Base Camp 2 is really all about, you know, okay, you've got things where you need it to be, but your cloud is always changing. So Basecamp 2 is really about being out in front of that change to make sure that when things are changing, nothing dangerous is happening. And I think that's been a lot of what we've been talking about. Basecamp 3 is really about shifting left and giving developers the tools they need to kind of find and fix problems in their cloud infrastructure dev environments before they become problems down the road where they're a little bit more time consuming and more of a headache to fix. And then there's the summit, which is really that kind of full cloud security automation across the SDLC. And that's when we get into kind of automated remediation with baseline enforcement and those kind of more advanced topics, which we definitely got into today. So this was kind of almost, I think, a full mountain survey, if you will, exactly. Hitting all the bases.
On every level.
Yeah.
Let me leave people with, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was saying that's why we wanted you on. I mean, one of the things that I saw in this, just from a technical vision of where we want to help customers get to, you are the ideal person. So I was glad that you were able to be on here. I try to express it, but people look at me like, what did you do? I was like,
oh man, well, they did the same to me. And that leads me to, if I have a final thought to leave folks with, it's stop being afraid.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of what the future is. The future is a global computer that we can automate, and we should do that rather than thinking kind of retrospectively, right? The cloud is not a remote data center. It's a global computer that you can control. So control it. And, stick your neck out a little bit, because life is better that way. And so is computing. And that's really the history of our industry. So thanks for inviting me to come. I hope I expressed that thought cogently, but that would be my strongest advice to folks when it comes to cloud, is recognize we're in a new world and that you have an opportunity and not just things to be concerned about, I suppose. Yeah,
it's awesome. And don't think you're not going to be roped into coming back onto office hours in the near future to get into more of these topics. So this was a lot of fun.
Well, cool. Thanks, guys. It was a lot of fun for me too.
Cool. Awesome.
And for folks watching, if you have other ideas or other ways that you're using Fugue that you think would be helpful for others, we're happy to show it here. So definitely let us know.
Yeah. Reach out. I'm Drew at fugue.co.
And I'm Ricardo at fugue.co.
I'm Josh at fugue.co, and hit me up.
Yeah. Great. I think so next session, I think we're probably going to be getting into some cloud compliance reporting and getting those automated, so they just kind of run in the background and you don't need those headaches anymore.
Yep, that, and we'll show people how they can create more task lists from doing the export as well to start bringing things into
compliance
in secure fashion. So yeah, it'll be cool. Not as cool as Josh, but it'll be cool.
Yeah, awesome. All right, well, thanks guys, and we will see you all on the next office hours. Cheers.